"Get off that toy piano, old man. It's for kids, not washed-up beggars." Those were the words that started it all. But what happened next left the entire park breathless. An elderly stranger sat down at a broken child's piano in the middle of a city park. Moments later, the music he played unlocked memories, healed wounds, and ignited a global movement of compassion, art, and rebirth. What began as mockery turned into magic when people realized who he really was and why he had returned after years in silence. Now, before we dive deeper, please like and subscribe to our channel. We share powerful, meaningful stories like this every day. And drop a comment below to let us know what time and where you're watching from. Thank you so much, and now let's get back to the story. "Yo, Grandpa, that piano's for toddlers, not retirement home rejects." The boy's laughter rang out over the city park, cocky and careless, like a stone tossed into still water. Heads turned. A few bystanders chuckled, awkward, uncertain. Some didn't bother to look up at all. They were used to loud voices in this part of the park, used to kids posturing, used to strange men sitting where they didn't belong. But the old man didn't respond. He simply lowered himself, slow and steady, onto the tiny plastic stool. His long brown coat folded awkwardly under him, pooling at the edges of the piano like a worn curtain in an abandoned theater. The child's piano in front of him was bright yellow, its paint chipped, stickers half peeled, and one of its legs propped up by an old library book. It looked ridiculous under his large, weathered hands. He just sat there, silent, a stillness around him that didn't match the noise of the world. Then, slowly, his fingers hovered over the keys. Uneven, some jammed, a few likely out of tune, if they even worked at all. He closed his eyes. The noisy world around him faded, replaced by something quieter, more distant. The teenager who had mocked him nudged his friend. "Seriously, what's he gonna do? Play chopsticks on a Fisher-Price piano?" More laughter. A woman pushing a stroller glanced over, raised an eyebrow, and kept walking. Near the bench, two joggers paused, phones in hand, ready to record a train wreck. And then, it began. One soft note, then another. The keys responded, surprisingly crisp for such a battered toy. There was something delicate in the way his fingers moved, not performing, but remembering, like the notes weren't being created, but unearthed. At first, the music was barely audible over the city's clamor, but it grew, not in volume, but in weight, as if every key pressed carried the gravity of something long buried. The air changed, subtly. The wind seemed to hush. Conversations dimmed. The jeering teen fell quiet mid-sentence, his face slack, puzzled. The melody that rose from the child's piano was haunting. It wasn't perfect. It couldn't be, not on that instrument, but there was something raw, wounded, and utterly sincere. It stumbled in places, not from lack of skill, but because some keys didn't work. And yet somehow it was beautiful in its brokenness. A woman feeding pigeons near the fountain turned her head, her hand frozen in midair, breadcrumbs falling unnoticed to the concrete. The violinist who often played across from the playground lowered her bow and watched, her eyes narrowing, lips parting in quiet disbelief. No one moved, except the man and his hands, which told a story wordlessly. The piano had only 2 octaves. But in those 2 octaves, he conjured oceans. The notes curled through the air like mist on a cold morning. They wrapped around ankles, climbed up spines, and settled behind eyes. A businessman talking loudly on his Bluetooth stopped mid-call and stared. A baby in a stroller started crying, not from fear, but something else, something no one could name. And still he played. He played as if each note were a memory he hadn't spoken aloud in decades. A gentle pull of grief, a hesitant laugh echoing down a hallway. A lullaby once whispered in the dark. The man's eyes stayed closed. His face was expressionless, but the park was not. Some people stepped closer. Others stayed where they were, afraid to interrupt something sacred. There were no spotlights, no microphone, no velvet ropes, just him and that absurd little piano, and a silence that felt almost reverent. A little girl, no older than 5, tugged at her mother's sleeve and pointed. "Mommy, is he sad?" Her mother didn't answer right away. Her mouth trembled slightly, her eyes never leaving the man's hands. The boy who had mocked him earlier sat on a bench now, silent, unsure. He wasn't laughing anymore. His phone had stopped recording. He didn't know why he suddenly felt embarrassed, or why his throat felt tight. And the music went on. The melody shifted into something gentler, like a stream rounding a bend. The man's shoulders rose slightly, then fell with a slow exhale. His fingers slowed, lingered. It was as if he had come to the edge of a memory he wasn't sure he wanted to touch, and then touched it anyway. One key gave a strange click. He paused, waited, and then changed the chord, adapting like he'd done this all his life, turning flaws into phrases. More people had gathered now, though they didn't realize it. It had happened gradually, the way rain does, unnoticed until you're soaked through. They weren't there to be entertained. They weren't there out of curiosity. They were there because something had reached out and caught them. A sound that wasn't flashy or perfect, but true. In a world drowning in noise, this man had somehow carved out a corner of silence. And then he stopped. No grand finish, no dramatic flourish, just one last note, long and soft like the final word in a love letter never sent. His hands dropped to his lap. No one clapped, not because they didn't want to, but because applause would have shattered the moment. And no one was ready to let it go. The man opened his eyes. They were deep and dark, not sad exactly, but carrying the weight of miles walked alone. He looked around, not at the crowd, but at the piano. He ran his hand along its plastic edge where crayon scribbles still marked a child's name, half erased, and then he smiled. A small, tired, genuine smile. The wind blew again, rustling leaves sending whispers through the trees. Somewhere a subway train rumbled beneath the city. And still the silence held, until a young voice broke it, soft, fragile. "Can you play another one, mister?" The man turned. A little boy with oversized glasses stood nearby, holding a worn music sheet in trembling hands. The man blinked. He reached forward and gently took the paper. The story was just beginning. The man held the worn music sheet delicately, as though it were something sacred, more fragile than the paper itself. The boy who had handed it to him stood nervously, his small fingers curled into his hoodie sleeves, rocking gently on his heels. The crowd still lingered, hushed, their breaths caught somewhere between wonder and disbelief. The old man studied the paper, eyes moving slowly, not rushing the moment. A simple melody was scrawled across the page in shaky pencil lines, smudged in places, clearly written by a child's hand. The title was clumsily underlined. "For my dad." Beneath it, a smiley face. 2 music notes beside it like tiny wings. He looked up at the boy. "Did you write this?" The boy nodded, his voice barely audible. I tried. For my dad. He used to play piano before he got sick." The man blinked, his expression unreadable, but something changed in the lines of his face. Softened, perhaps, or broken open in a place no one could see. He folded the sheet once, neatly, and placed it on the cracked plastic ledge of the toy piano. Then he nodded once, more to himself than to anyone else, and gently laid his hands on the keys again. The sound that emerged this time was different. Not the haunting melancholy of before, but something hopeful. Fragile, yes, but with light threading through it. He didn't play the notes as written, not exactly. The child's melody had no harmonies, no dynamic markings. It was just a sketch. But the man filled in the blank spaces, not with arrogance, but with reverence. He took what the boy had written and turned it into something whole. The crowd leaned in, drawn like moths to a flickering candle. The tune built slowly, like dawn breaking over a quiet lake. Notes danced, then dipped, then soared. It was imperfect, but pure. And behind each note was a tenderness that hurt to hear. The boy's mother had her hand over her mouth now, her other arm wrapped tightly around her son's shoulders, as if to shield him from something invisible yet immense. A woman whispered, "My God, I've never heard anything like that." Near the benches, the violinist had tears in her eyes. She lowered herself to the ground, sat cross-legged in the grass, and listened like it was church. Children gathered again, drawn not by noise but by something they couldn't name. A little girl clutched a ragged stuffed rabbit to her chest, rocking gently in time with the rhythm. The man swayed as he played, just slightly, like the melody was moving through him, not from his fingers, but from his chest. The keys clicked and squeaked, some stuck down longer than others, but he never faltered. He moved with the instrument's imperfections like a sailor charting a stormy sea with bare hands. The security guard from earlier returned. He stood frozen behind a tree, uncertain now, the rules in his pocket suddenly too small to matter. Then came a moment where the man faltered. Not musically, but emotionally. His fingers hovered mid-air for just a breath too long. And in that space, something raw cracked open inside him. He looked at the boy, at the title on the page, and his hands trembled ever so slightly. Still, he played. He played until the song unfolded into a final verse, a quiet goodbye wrapped in promise. When the last note fell, it did not die. It lingered, floated, like a feather suspended in twilight. No one moved, no one dared. And then the boy, with tears brimming in his eyes, whispered, "That was exactly how I heard it in my head." The man looked at him, really looked, and smiled. "That's because it was already perfect. I just translated it." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Not applause still, but something deeper, a wave of shared feeling, of communion. Someone whispered his name, only half believing it. "Nathaniel, Quinn?" But the man didn't respond. He stood slowly, every movement precise and respectful. He brushed off his coat, even though no dust clung to it, and then he turned, ready. That's when the girl with Down syndrome from earlier wandered up to him again. She was holding something in her tiny fists, a plastic daisy, missing one petal. She reached out and pressed it into his palm. "Thank you for the sunshine," she said quietly. His throat tightened, his eyes shimmered, and for the first time since sitting down, he looked truly unguarded. He knelt slowly, so their eyes were level, and said softly, "You just gave me some too." She hugged him, without asking, without hesitation, and somehow that single gesture shattered whatever remained of the invisible wall around him. He closed his eyes as she hugged him. 1 second, then another. His hands didn't move, they just held the flower. The crowd exhaled together, a sigh, a release, and just like that, a man who had tried to disappear became unforgettable. He stood, kissed the top of the girl's head, and turned to go once more. But the boy with the music sheet ran after him, calling, "Wait, please, what's your name?" The man paused. For the first time he faced the crowd fully, and with the softest, most certain voice, he answered, "Just someone who believes music is never really lost." Then he stepped back into the flow of people and vanished among them. No entourage, no cameras, no explanation. Just a single daisy in his hand and a song echoing behind him. The boy stood frozen, music sheet fluttering in his grip like a small flag. The woman with the violin picked up her instrument again, and softly, reverently began to play the same tune the man had just transformed. Others joined in, quietly, respectfully. A cello from the corner, a flute from somewhere farther back. Someone whistled the melody from a bench, and the park sang. It didn't matter who he was, because now he was everywhere, in every note, in every hush between chords. The piano, small and imperfect, stayed in place. A single leaf landed on its keys. The sun dipped lower in the sky, and the child's melody, once scribbled in pencil, now lived in hearts, forever. The sun dipped behind a veil of clouds, casting the park in a softer light. Gold turned to pewter. The crowd had begun to drift, slow and silent, as if stepping away from a cathedral after prayer. Children were the last to leave, reluctant to abandon the little yellow piano now transformed in their eyes into something magical. No longer a toy, but a relic. Only one figure remained completely still. The violinist. She sat on the edge of the fountain, her bow resting gently across her lap, eyes fixed on the piano as if waiting for it to speak again. Her name was Lila Torres, a former prodigy turned street musician. Her fingers, once gracing the stages of Vienna and Prague, had not trembled with awe in years. But they did now. The man's melody still hummed in her bones. As the first raindrop fell, a light, uncertain touch on the piano's lid, she stood and approached the bench where he had sat. She ran her fingers across the place his coat had creased the plastic. She didn't know his story, but she knew music. And no one who played like that did so without carrying something deeper than talent. She reached for her case and began tuning. She hadn't planned on playing again that day. But something about the silence he left behind demanded to be answered. From across the walkway, a figure watched her. He was middle-aged, wearing a pressed charcoal suit and glasses that reflected more of the sky than his own gaze. He had been standing by a sculpture, motionless, from the moment the mysterious man had disappeared into the crowd. Now, as Lila lifted her bow and began to play the boy's melody again, gently, respectfully, the man approached. "That tune," he said, his voice low, "wasn't written by a child." Lila turned but didn't stop playing. "It was." He hesitated. "That's impossible." The woman gave a small smile without breaking her rhythm. Some truths don't need your permission. The man looked at her for a long moment, then his expression softened. You're right. He glanced at the piano. I was 12 when my mother died. The only thing that made sense afterward was the piano in our living room. It was broken. 4 keys didn't work. Still, it was the only place I felt like I could breathe. Lila stopped playing now, bow lowering. That's what he played like. The man nodded. He knew loss. The wind shifted then, just enough to lift a piece of paper from beneath the piano's foot, the sheet the boy had written. It fluttered once, twice, then drifted into the air like a departing spirit. Lila caught it before it could fly away. She smoothed it in her palm. This is more than a psalm. The man stepped closer. It's a map. You just have to know how to read it. Their eyes met, 2 strangers connected not by names but by memory, and from behind them a voice called out, I know who he is. Heads turned. It was the teenage boy, the one who had laughed, who had filmed, who had gone silent. He was running back into the clearing, phone in hand, face flushed with urgency. His friends trailed behind him, unsure. I posted the video, right? He panted. Didn't think much of it. But like, people are going crazy in the comments, and then someone sent me this article. He thrust the phone toward them. On the screen, a photo. Grainy, old, and in black and white, but unmistakable. A younger version of the man who'd played the toy piano, standing beside a concert grand, a tuxedo hung loosely on his frame, his hand still on the keys, head bowed. The headline read, Nathaniel Quinn performs one final time before disappearing from public life. Lila stared at the screen, her heartbeat quickening. Nathaniel Quinn, that's not just anyone. That's the founder of the Solace Foundation, the sweeted man said quietly. He built music schools in war zones, sent pianos to refugee camps, saved entire orchestras during the collapse of the Cultural Fund. And then he vanished. No one saw him again. The boy swallowed hard, suddenly reverent. That was him? That was him? Lila looked back at the little yellow piano, as if seeing it for the first time. Yes, she whispered, and we let him walk away. But even as she said it, she knew that's what he wanted. That's why he chose this place. A park, a toy piano, no stage, no lights, just music. The man in the suit cleared his throat. I used to work with him years ago. He had a son, Samuel, sweet boy, leukemia. Nathaniel stopped performing when he passed. His voice cracked on the last word. Lila felt her chest ache. He never stopped playing, just stopped being seen. And still, as the crowd now gathered around the phone screen, whispering and scrolling and pointing, none of it felt as real as the sound that still echoed in their hearts. Suddenly, the little boy who had given Nathaniel the music sheet tugged on his mother's sleeve again. Mom, can I tell them something? She knelt, brushing hair from his face. Of course, baby. He walked toward the small cluster around the piano, shy but brave. He didn't just play my song, he said. He gave it feelings. Like it was talking. No one replied. He looked down. My dad can't talk anymore. His voice is gone from the medicine. But when I heard that piano, it felt like Dad was saying, I love you to me again. His voice cracked. The silence was thunderous. The boy turned and walked back to his mother, head low. She embraced him tightly, her eyes full of tears. No one dared follow with words, but one by one they responded with action. A man took off his jacket and laid it on the piano stool, as if offering comfort. A young girl placed a sunflower beside the pedals. The violinist returned to her spot and played a final note. And then, like something whispered rather than announced, it began to rain. Not a storm, not a downpour, just a steady, gentle mist that softened everything it touched. People didn't run, they stayed. Because what had happened here wasn't something to run from. It was something they needed to let settle deep inside them, like rain into thirsty soil. Lila pulled the piano closer under a tree's canopy. It wasn't much protection, but it was something. She touched the keys, wet now, glistening, and whispered, We'll keep it safe, I promise. And as she looked out over the crowd, she knew he hadn't disappeared. He had returned to where music mattered most. Not concert halls, not galas, but right here, among the forgotten, among the broken, among those who still believed music could speak when words could not. Rain threaded gently through the trees like silver lace, softening edges, deepening colors, drawing the world into quiet reflection. The little yellow piano sat beneath the boughs of a maple, its plastic keys spotted with drops that glistened like tears. Around it, the crowd lingered. not because they hoped for more music, but because they couldn't yet leave. Something unspoken still held them there, suspended in the afterglow of something sacred. The boy who'd handed Nathaniel his hand-drawn composition now stood holding his mother's hand. She had knelt beside him, arms wrapped protectively around his small shoulders, but it was clear now the protection went both ways. The child had offered something deeply personal, and a stranger, no, a legend, had given it breath. The boy's eyes kept flicking to the bench, half hoping the man would return. But he didn't. Instead, another figure emerged. A young girl, no more than 7, walked slowly toward the piano. She wore red rain boots, one slightly too large, and clutched a stuffed lion missing an ear. Her eyes were large and solemn. Without a word, she reached up and pressed a single key, a hollow plink. She did it again, this time holding the lion closer to her chest. Plink, plink, plink. No rhythm, no melody, just pure instinct, a child reaching for something she didn't fully understand but somehow trusted. The sound echoed in the quiet space left behind by Nathaniel's departure. And it was enough. Then another child came forward, a boy with freckles and a green backpack. He sat on the damp bench beside her and started tapping keys at random, then stopped, laughed nervously, and tried again. The notes weren't beautiful, but they weren't meaningless either. Before long, a small circle had formed, 5 or 6 children sitting on the wet grass or taking turns at the bench, exploring sound the way only children can, fearlessly, joyfully, as if the music was already inside them and just needed a place to land. Lila stood off to the side, watching with quiet wonder. In her arms, her violin rested like a sleeping bird. She didn't play. Not yet. What was happening now wasn't hers to lead. It belonged to them. And then the moment cracked open wider. A man stepped forward from the crowd. Tall, mid-30s. His jeans were faded, his jacket torn at the sleeve. But his presence was commanding, not from arrogance, but from something that hummed beneath the surface like coiled electricity. In his hands, he held a guitar. Old, scratched, its strings unevenly wound. He knelt beside the children and without speaking began to strum. Soft chords, gentle progressions, meant to support, not overshadow. A rhythmic heartbeat beneath their scattered notes. One of the children giggled, then matched his key to the chord. Another followed, and just like that, it became music again. Not a song, not yet, but the beginning of one. People gathered closer. Phones came out again, but this time they weren't aiming for virality. They were preserving something rare. A moment of true community, a moment of healing. Lila finally stepped forward. She raised her violin, tucked it under her chin, and joined in, not with a solo, but with a harmony. A thread weaving between the guitar and the toy piano, holding everything together with grace. The melody was simple, repetitive, but it grew, swelled. An elderly woman hummed from a bench. A teen with braces clapped softly in time. A mother with a stroller began tapping her baby's foot in rhythm. It wasn't a performance anymore. It was a belonging. Even the security guard who had once tried to remove Nathaniel now stood at the perimeter, cap in his hands, nodding along, his stern posture forgotten, and then someone began to sing. Just one voice at first, unsteady, like a candle flickering in a breeze. A man in his 60s, standing alone near the bike rack. His voice was rough with age, cracked with emotion. He sang no lyrics, just a melody, wordless but filled with meaning, the kind of sound that bypasses language and goes straight to the heart. Others joined, a hum, a harmony, a crescendo of strangers becoming a choir. And through it all, the piano sat at the center like a lighthouse, humble, chipped, slightly out of tune, but glowing in its own small way. They played for minutes, then longer. No one kept time. No one needed to. When the music finally faded, it didn't end so much as dissolve, like a dream slipping into memory. Silence returned, but it was not the same silence that had followed Nathaniel's performance. That had been reverent. This was full, like something had been poured out, and now the space was blessed. Lila lowered her bow. Her fingers trembled, not from fatigue, but from awe. The children clapped, not the polite kind, but the kind that came from the belly. The crowd echoed them. Gentle applause, not loud, not demanding, just enough to honor what had happened. A mother whispered, "That man, he gave us more than a song." The guitar player, still kneeling, looked up at her. "He gave us permission." "To what?" she asked. He smiled, "To feel again." She nodded. No more words came. The clouds above began to break. A shaft of sunlight pierced through, painting the piano in gold once more. Steam rose gently from the wet grass, curling in the air like incense, and from far off, just barely audible, came a faint, lingering echo, a whistle. It rose and fell in a perfect replica of the tune Nathaniel had played earlier. Lila's head snapped up, so did the children's. The whistle repeated. Closer this time. It was coming from across the lawn. Every head turned, and there he was, Nathaniel, walking slowly beneath the trees, coat slightly damp, a daisy still tucked in his pocket. He didn't head for the piano. He didn't say a word. He just paused beside the fountain, eyes scanning the crowd, taking in the laughter, the instruments, the unity. He smiled, small, real, then turned and walked on. This time, no one tried to stop him. They didn't need to, because he had already left the best part of himself behind. In a toy piano, in a boy's melody, in the rain, in the silence, and most of all, in them. The next morning, the yellow piano was gone. Someone had moved it during the night, though no one claimed credit. A few thought it had been stolen. Others whispered the city must have taken it, citing ordinances or noise complaints. But those who had been there the day before knew better. It wasn't gone, it had been protected. In its place now stood a laminated note pinned to the grass by a smooth river stone. 3 simple lines. The music continues. Meet me here at sunset. Bring nothing but your heart. NQ. No name, no invitation, no explanation. But the message spread fast. Phones buzzed, screens lit up. The video from the teen had gone viral overnight, over 4 million views and counting. And yet, strangely, no one could find any recent trace of Nathaniel Quinn. His name trended, but his whereabouts remained a mystery. The man was a ghost, but one whose song people now carried in their chests. By late afternoon, the park transformed. Someone brought a keyboard and plugged it into a portable generator. A folding chair appeared, then 2, then 20. The grass was trampled by footsteps eager to return. Children chalked music notes across the pavement. A florist donated buckets of daisies and sunflowers. Elderly women baked cookies and handed them out as if hosting a neighborhood vigil. Local musicians carried instruments on their backs like sacred offerings. The city, for once, said nothing. No officers came to shut it down. No permits were asked for. The mayor's office tweeted a single heart emoji with a piano key. As the sun inched toward the horizon, a palpable hush began to settle. Not fear, not tension, something closer to reverence, as if the park itself had taken a breath and was holding it, waiting. Among the crowd stood Lila, her violin case hugged tightly to her chest. She wore a white scarf around her shoulders, the same scarf she had worn at her final recital before injury took her off the circuit. Tonight, she didn't feel broken, she felt needed. Beside her, the young boy clutched his folded music sheet, now encased in a protective sleeve someone had given him. His eyes scanned the trees. "He'll come," Lila whispered. "I feel it." But as dusk turned to twilight and the sky bruised with purple and gold, no familiar silhouette appeared. Instead, a sound did. The soft squeak of wheels, wooden, rusted, all heads turned. Through the clearing came a shopping cart, not the kind filled with groceries, but with objects. A ukulele, a battered metronome, a hand drum, even a tambourine, pushed by a woman with silver braids and glass bead earrings, her steps slow, proud, deliberate. She stopped at the center of the lawn, looked at the waiting faces and said, "He told me to bring these." A murmur passed through the crowd. "He gave them to me when my music school burned down. Told me I'd know when it was time to share." She looked around. "It's time." People stepped forward, shy at first, then with purpose. They took instruments gently, cradling them like they might splinter in their arms. Then came the second wave. A man arrived carrying an upright piano on a dolly. Behind him were 3 more, each with their own story. A woman said hers had belonged to her grandmother. A boy said his came from the rec center. One was wrapped in plastic sheeting. Another had vines drawn across its frame. In minutes, the park was a forest of pianos. And still, no Nathaniel, but no one left. Not even when the streetlights flickered on and the night deepened around them like velvet. Instead, something even more extraordinary happened. They began to play. Not together, not coordinated, not rehearsed, just played. Some with skill, others with clumsy courage. But each keystroke carried intention, memory, forgiveness, regret. All of it poured into melodies that wove through the park like rivers meeting in the dark. Lila lifted her violin and let it sing. The little boy, too shy to reach the keys himself, stood beside a woman who invited him onto her lap. She helped him press the notes he remembered. 1, then 2, then a chord. And then he smiled. He smiled so wide it made people cry. Above them all, a drone buzzed overhead, capturing it live for the world. But the screen could never hold what it felt like to stand there, what it meant to believe in beauty again. And still, no Nathaniel. Until a bus pulled up at the edge of the park. Its doors hissed open. Out stepped a woman in a pressed blazer. Then a second. Then a man in a dark overcoat. Journalists, microphones, cameras. Flashes burst like silent lightning. At the center of the crowd, the boy flinched. Lila stepped in front of him protectively. "Who's in charge here?" One reporter barked. "Who organized this?" No one answered. The silver-haired woman with the cart said, "No one, and everyone." "Was Nathaniel Quinn here tonight?" Silence. "Has anyone seen him since yesterday?" More silence. Faces glanced toward trees, shadows, hope, and then, soft, barely audible, a melody. It floated across the lawn like a memory returning. One note, then two. Delicate, intentional, familiar. Every heart turned toward the sound. Behind the pianos, behind the food tables, in the shadow of an oak, Nathaniel sat. Not at the head of anything, not on a stage, just on a small stool beside a child-sized keyboard left by someone who didn't know where else to place it. He played like he always did, softly, sincerely, as if the world hadn't found him again, as if he had never been lost. The crowd didn't cheer, they listened. The cameras didn't dare interrupt. Even the reporters stepped back. Because this wasn't a story. It was a healing, a reckoning, a return. And Nathaniel, in the center of it all, simply bowed his head and kept playing. They didn't swarm him, not at first. The cameras stayed back. The reporters kept their distance, hushed by the solemn weight of what was unfolding. Even the children instinctively knew not to run. It was as if Nathaniel Quinn, in the way he sat with curved shoulders and bowed head over the toy keyboard, had cast an invisible circle around himself, sacred, still, untouchable. The notes he played were brilliant. They weren't grand, but they were true. They wove themselves into the night like threads of breath, pulling people closer not with spectacle, but with sincerity. A lullaby, a lament, a quiet invitation to remember something you didn't know you'd forgotten. And one by one they came, not to interrupt, but to join. A woman sat cross-legged near him, eyes closed, hands clasped, her breath sinking with the music. A young man lit a single candle and placed it on the ground nearby, the flame trembling like it too was listening. A child laid a flower next to Nathaniel's foot, not asking, not speaking, just offering. Still he played. Then a camera flash, and another. The moment fractured, not loudly but sharply. Nathaniel's hands paused mid-phrase, his shoulders stiffened. The spell broke, a voice male, insistent. "Mr. Quinn, why now? Why reappear here in a public park after years in silence?" Another flash. "Did you plan this event, or was it spontaneous?" Nathaniel lifted his head slowly, and the look in his eyes, clear, deeply lined, quietly devastated, made even the reporter falter. "I didn't come to be found," he said. His voice was soft, gravelly, but unwavering. "I came to listen." "To what?" someone asked. Nathaniel looked around the park, eyes touching every face, every instrument, every soul that had spilled into the grass under a dusk-painted sky. To the world, without its mask. There was a pause. Then the press did what the press does. "Mr. Quinn, is it true your foundation collapsed after your son's death? Is it true you liquidated your assets and walked away from over $1 billion? Is it true the Solace Foundation mismanaged donations?" Lila stepped forward now, fists clenched, the crowd behind her murmuring with uncertainty and anger. "Enough," she said, firm but steady. "You weren't here. You didn't hear what he gave us." But Nathaniel raised his hand, silencing her gently. "I'll answer," he said, "but not to defend, just to speak." He stood. The little keyboard gave a final chime as he stepped away, standing now in the open, every light and lens trained on him. "Yes, I walked away. From boards, from meetings, from money, but not from music, not from people." He looked toward the young boy with the music sheet, now holding his mother's hand again, eyes wide and solemn. "I lost my son," Nathaniel continued. "And when I did, I realized something terrifying. I had built empires with my hands, but never sat still long enough to hold him when it mattered most." Silence rippled like a wave. The crowd's breath caught as one. "I made music for power, for praise, for prestige. But my son, He made music for joy. He made music to heal. And when he left this world, he left behind a silence I didn't know how to survive. He looked down, blinked once, and continued. So I vanished. I walked, I rode trains, slept on benches, found old pianos in back alleys and churches, played to no one. Sometimes I think I was trying to find him in the notes, and sometimes I think he found me. No one dared speak, no one could. My foundation didn't collapse, he added. I gave it away, to people who could lead it better than I ever did. The rumors of financial ruin were just noise. Noise to explain why someone like me would choose obscurity over acclaim. But you don't need wealth to be full. You don't need applause to know something matters. His voice cracked, just slightly, and in that tremble, the truth echoed louder than any headline ever could. A teenager in the back, still holding his phone, slowly lowered it. The reporter who had first broken the silence took a single step back, and then the boy, his boy, the one with the handmade song, stepped forward, small, brave. He walked right up to Nathaniel, looked up into his face and asked, "Do you think he heard you?" Nathaniel kneeled. He looked into the child's eyes, placed a hand over his heart and whispered, "I don't just think, I know, because I heard you." The boy nodded once, like that was the only answer he'd needed. Then something remarkable happened. A woman in the crowd pulled out a worn composition notebook. Another held up an old cassette player with a song she hadn't listened to in years. A father carried a photo of his daughter at her first recital. A girl showed a poem she had written when her mother left. It was as if Nathaniel's truth had pulled theirs into the open, things long buried, long protected, now safe to share. And from that flood of vulnerability, something transcendent emerged. A man near the edge of the park set up a mic and amp. Someone wheeled out an electric keyboard. Lila tuned her violin. And before anyone gave permission, before anyone organized a thing, the music began again. Not in performance, not for show, but as witness, as celebration, as resurrection. Nathaniel didn't return to the keyboard. He sat cross-legged on the grass beside the boy, beside the girl with the lion, beside the teen who had once mocked him and now cried quietly into his sleeve. He didn't lead. He listened. And in doing so, he gave them more than music. He gave them each other. He gave them space. He gave them silence when silence was sacred. And when he finally rose to leave again, no one tried to stop him. They watched him go, not with sadness but with gratitude, because they knew he hadn't left. He had simply passed the melody on, and it was already singing in them. The days that followed blurred like brushstrokes across a rain-washed canvas. The park that once hosted pigeons, joggers, and stroller wheels now breathed with the steady heartbeat of something else. A movement, a quiet revolution where strangers gathered each evening, not out of obligation, not out of spectacle, but out of need. They brought with them their voices, their hands, their instruments, sometimes nothing more than a notebook and the ache to be understood. They left behind judgment, titles, politics, pretenses. It was not a festival. There were no flyers, no sponsors, no stage, only a space and the invisible echo of a man who had said little, but had spoken to them all. Nathaniel Quinn didn't return the next night, nor the one after that. But it didn't matter. He had already done what so few could. He had awakened something in people that even they didn't know was sleeping. And now, the music didn't wait for him. It lived on its own, carried by the boy's lullaby, by Lila's bow, by the elderly woman's hand drum, by the silence between notes that no longer felt empty. But not everyone welcomed what was happening. On the fourth evening, as golden hour painted long shadows across the grass, a black SUV with tinted windows rolled up and parked at the edge of the gathering. Its engine hummed longer than necessary before falling silent. Two men stepped out, suits, lanyards, stern faces. One held a leather folder. The other wore an expression that was neither open nor hostile, just prepared. They didn't speak at first. They watched. Lila saw them. So did the violinist from uptown, the man with the cassette player, and the former music teacher who had baked cookies 3 nights in a row. The crowd felt the shift. The stillness that came, not from reverence this time, but from uncertainty. Then, without invitation, one of the men stepped forward. "I need to speak with Nathaniel Quinn," he announced. His voice carried too smooth to be kind. "He's not here," someone answered. "When will he be?" No one responded. The man adjusted his cuff and looked around. My name is Everett Pike. I'm General Counsel for the Solace Foundation. Mr. Quinn's name, likeness, and presence are still bound to multiple pending contracts and fiduciary responsibilities. His reappearance in public has triggered legal inquiries. Murmurs rustled through the crowd. The child with the music sheet tightened his grip on his mother's hand. Everett continued. The foundation is being questioned by government bodies, stakeholders, and international partners. His actions here, however inspiring, have consequences. Lila stepped forward, slow but steady. And what consequence would you suggest for a man who plays a broken piano with children? Everett looked at her as one might a well-meaning interruption. Emotion doesn't erase accountability, Miss Torres, she said. And I don't think he was asking for erasure, just resurrection. The second man, the one who had been silent, spoke now, softer. We don't want to hurt anyone, we just want answers. You already got one, someone said from the back. He gave it without needing to say much at all. Everett opened the leather folder. Pages flipped, forms, statements, letters printed in tight legal fonts. He looked at the crowd with the eyes of someone used to being listened to. But the people here didn't fold, because they weren't here to obey. They were here to feel. Why now? Everett finally asked, as if weary of performance. Why reappear after all these years? Why here? The question wasn't rhetorical. It drifted into the air like incense looking for a place to land. And then, a quiet voice. I never reappeared. Gasps. From the crowd's edge, Nathaniel stepped into the light. His coat was the same, his face unreadable. He looked not like a man cornered, but like one who had already chosen his next step. Everett's shoulders tightened. Nathaniel, you've been served. The documents. Nathaniel raised a hand. I won't run, but I won't pretend either. He looked around, not at the suits, but at the people, the faces that had sung with him, wept with him, changed with him. I walked away from a world that taught me to trade music for influence, pain for performance, and children's laughter for shareholders' comfort. I'm not sorry I left. I'm sorry it took me this long to find something worth returning to. He turned to Everett. If that means lawsuits, so be it. If that means consequences, I'll face them, but I won't stop playing, not now. The younger man beside Everett, his name was Harris, stepped forward, his tone cracked. Sir, my daughter came here 3 nights ago. She played a note for the first time in 2 years. He looked away. She hasn't spoken since the accident, but she played. Because of you. Nathaniel's eyes softened. I'm not here to destroy you, Harris added. I'm here to say thank you. Everett blinked, stunned. The crowd watched as the two men stood in silent tension, not as adversaries, but as reflections, one remembering what the world tried to make him forget, the other learning it for the first time. And then, without fanfare, Harris walked away, toward the instruments, toward the people, toward the song. Everett remained still. And Nathaniel? He sat down. Not at a concert grand, not at a stage, but at the little upright piano someone had placed beneath the elm, and he began to play again. No words, just truth. Everett lingered a moment longer. Then he slowly closed the folder, pressed it to his chest, and turned away. He didn't leave with victory. He left with a question. A question the music refused to answer. Because some things aren't meant to be resolved. Some things are meant to be felt. Rain returned 2 nights later, not heavy, but persistent, as if the sky itself needed to cry for a while. Most of the crowd came anyway. They came with umbrellas, folding chairs wrapped in plastic, and instruments tucked under coats. They came without expectation, without promise of Nathaniel's return. But that was never the point anymore. The movement had outgrown the man who sparked it. It had become its own living thing. In the shelter of the old elm, the little upright piano waited. Keys slightly warped now from moisture, the lowest F no longer responding at all. And still someone came to play. Tonight it was Lila. She didn't bring her violin. Instead, she brought silence. And a hand-lettered sign that read simply, "Play if you feel something." Then she sat cross-legged in the grass and waited. At first, no one approached. Then a boy came, younger than most, hair too long, sneakers taped at the toes. He played 2 hesitant notes, then 3 more, then ran off without a word. But he smiled. Later, a teenager came with purple headphones resting around her neck. She sat at the piano, slipped the headphones over the microphone taped near the pedal, and pressed her phone against the wood. She played a soft beat beneath the melody. Just rhythm. but enough to make the air move again. Then others followed. An old woman in a poncho, a blind man who hummed while his fingers wandered across the white keys like they were braille. A couple. He played the melody, she added harmony, their shoulders touching the entire time. By nightfall, the bench was wet with stories, and still Nathaniel had not returned. But whispers spread that he was somewhere. Someone said they saw him in a music store downtown, speaking softly to a boy whose trumpet valves had rusted over. Another claimed he had visited a nursing home and repaired a broken piano in silence. A teacher said she saw him standing outside her school's locked auditorium, eyes glassy, hands at his sides, like he was remembering something the walls hadn't forgotten. The truth? He was everywhere, because the music had become the message. And then one evening, without warning, a face from the past appeared. She stepped out of a taxi near the edge of the park. Not young, not old. Her coat was soaked through from the rain. Her eyes scanned the grass, the lights, the small collection of people gathered in their usual half circle. She walked with the steadiness of someone who had once been strong and was trying to be again. Lila noticed her first. She stood, approached slowly. "You looking for someone?" The woman nodded. "I think I'm looking for a version of myself." Lila blinked. "You're welcome to stay as long as you like." The woman looked toward the piano. "I used to teach Nathaniel Quinn." Lila stiffened. She nodded. "Madeline Grayson, Conservatory, 1984. He was 19, a firestorm even then. But there was gentleness under all that talent. People don't remember that part." Lila led her to the front. "He's not here tonight, but somehow he is." Madeline sat slowly on a damp bench, not caring about the rain. Her fingers laced together tightly. "I was hard on him, too hard. I thought discipline would make him invincible. Instead, I taught him how to disappear." Her voice cracked. "When I heard the music on the video, I knew that softness was still alive, and it destroyed me. Because I tried to train it out of him." She reached into her purse, pulled out a photograph. A young Nathaniel, laughing, barefoot, leaning over a keyboard in a sunlit classroom. "I keep it as penance," she whispered. Lila sat beside her, gentle. "What if it's not penance? What if it's just memory?" And just as she said it, someone gasped. He was there. No grand entrance, no music swelling in the background. Just Nathaniel, stepping between the trees like he'd always belonged to the shadows. His coat soaked, his hair damp, his hands empty. But his eyes were locked on Madeline. He didn't speak, neither did she, until she stood. "I'm sorry," she said simply. Nathaniel looked at her for a long, impossible moment. Then he stepped forward. He didn't offer judgment, he offered his hand, and she took it. Rain poured around them now, no longer soft, but no one moved. Not the musicians, not the watchers, not the boy holding the sheet music, not the mother with her arms wrapped tight around herself, because they were watching not just a reunion, but a redemption. A moment where the past unclenched its fists. Madeline reached into her coat and pulled out a folded score. "You wrote this the year your mother died. You never let me hear it." Nathaniel unfolded it slowly. The notes were faint, smudged, but the title was still visible, Sonata for Silence. He nodded once, then walked to the piano. It wasn't the grand Steinway he once knew. It wasn't even the upright from his childhood. It was warped and wheezing, missing an F, too small for his frame. And it was perfect. He began to play. The music was not performance. It was confession, broken phrases, chords that swelled then fell, melodies that circled back on themselves, unresolved. It sounded like grief, like hope that dared not speak too loud, like forgiveness written in a language only the soul could understand. By the time he played the final note, held it until it disappeared into rain and breath, Madeline's shoulders were trembling. Nathaniel stood, walked to her, and embraced her. It wasn't dramatic. It was necessary. Lila wept quietly beside them. And in the distance, someone whispered, "He's not saving music, he's returning it." 3 days after Nathaniel played Sonata for Silence, something unexpected happened. Not dramatic, not televised, not accompanied by a marching band or a press release, but deeply, unmistakably real. An anonymous donor had left a single envelope beneath the little upright piano. No signature, no fanfare. Inside, a check, handwritten, $5 million. Tucked beneath it, a note. "This space made me remember who I used to be. Let others remember too." The news spread slowly, at first only whispered among the regulars. Lila found out while helping a girl string ribbons through the fence that now bore chalk-written lyrics and tear-stained poems. By nightfall, the conversation shifted. It wasn't just about music anymore. It was about building something. No one said foundation. No one said organization. But the feeling was there, floating in the air like pollen, this aching hope that what they'd created wasn't just fleeting, but fertile. Lila took a breath and gathered the others. The woman with the silver braid, the teen who played with headphones, the man who brought his cello every Wednesday and never said a word. They sat in a quiet circle beneath the elm, instruments resting at their sides, hearts brimming with both fear and possibility. Lila began, "We don't need to make it formal, but maybe we make it lasting." There were nods. "What would it be called?" the silver-haired woman asked. No one answered right away. Then the boy, yes, that boy, lifted his hand and said softly, "The listening room." Lila tilted her head. "Why that?" he smiled. "Because no one ever really listened to me before this place. But now, when I play, I feel like someone hears me, even when it's just a few notes, even when it's wrong." The silence that followed was immediate, deep, sacred. The listening room. It didn't need walls. It already had people. By the end of that week, the movement had grown far beyond the park. A video of Nathaniel playing the toy piano reached 10 million views. But more importantly, people didn't just watch it. They answered it. Videos poured in from around the world. A boy in Mumbai playing spoons beside his grandmother humming lullabies. A woman in Nebraska setting a violin bow to strings for the first time in decades. A teenager in Seoul dragging an old upright piano into the subway and leaving a sign that read, "Play if you remember." Hashtags followed. Comments bloomed. But what mattered most were the ripples it created in person. In a senior home downtown, an ex-convict tuned a forgotten piano and taught a 92-year-old how to play chopsticks with 2 fingers. In a burn ward, a music therapist printed the sheet of Sonata for Silence and taped it to the wall, letting her patients trace the notes with trembling hands. In a prison yard, an inmate sang one of the park's melodies into the wind, while others tapped rhythms on the metal benches in reply. And all of them, in one way or another, whispered the same thing. He made the world listen again. Still, Nathaniel kept his distance. He came only when it mattered most. No cameras, no announcements, just quiet entrances, gentle exits. He never spoke on stage, he never claimed credit. But the people knew. They could feel it in the way the movement never lost its soul. One night, as Lila stood tuning her violin beneath the light strung between the trees, a girl approached with a folded paper in hand. Her voice shook. "Miss Lila, my brother can't come here, he's in the hospital. But he asked if someone could play this for him." Lila took the paper. Looked at the notes. It was simple. Barely a melody. But it pulsed with something innocent and aching. She nodded. "Tell your brother we heard him." That night, she played it. And somewhere across town in a quiet hospital room, a nurse turned on the live stream and held the speaker to a boy's ear. His heart monitor skipped just slightly, then steadied. Later, that boy's mother left a voice message in the inbox of the listening room's new website. He smiled for the first time in weeks. "Thank you, whoever you are." Meanwhile, beneath it all, something deeper stirred. A piano manufacturer offered to donate refurbished instruments to public spaces. A school board voted unanimously to reinstate music programs after a student performed one of the park's songs in protest. And the mayor? She stepped onto the grass one evening, heels muddy, and said into a borrowed microphone, "This is what art without ego looks like, and it will not be ignored." Then she quietly pulled city funds from a development project and redirected them toward preserving the park as a protected creative zone. Still, amid all the momentum, Nathaniel remained quiet. He showed up one early morning when no one was around, tuned the toy piano by hand, left a daisy on the bench, and vanished before sunrise. Lila found the flower. She didn't need to see him to know he'd been there. But one person did want to see him again, and she wasn't content to wait. Madeline Grayson returned the next evening with a folder in her hands. Inside, sketches, blueprints, ideas scribbled on napkins and coffee-stained paper. "A school," she said. "Not like the ones we had. Not cold, not competitive. Just safe." Lila looked through the drawings. Rooms shaped like circles, practice studios with no mirrors, gardens between classrooms, instruments for every size, hand, and heart. "What would we call it?" she asked. Madeline smiled. The listening room, Chapter 2. People gathered, they read, they voted, not in secret but in song. That night they lit candles across the park, not for mourning, for birth. The next morning, Nathaniel sat on a bench across the street, hidden beneath his coat. He watched the construction marker go up. He saw the people painting signs. He saw the children running with ribbon streamers between piano benches and patchy grass. He didn't go in. He just closed his eyes and whispered one word. Begin. It began, not with fanfare but with stillness. A dusk heavier than usual wrapped the park in a velvet hush. The trees swayed slowly, as if breathing in sync with something unseen. A soft golden glow bathed the grass from overhead string lights, while candles flickered low along the path, each one lit for a name whispered earlier that week. A lost parent, a friend never found, a version of oneself abandoned long ago. And beneath the old elm, now strung with ribbons and rain beads from the morning storm, stood the little yellow piano. Polished, repaired, still humble, still childlike. But tonight it looked like an altar. Lila stood nearby, her violin slung over her back. She didn't plan to play tonight. Her hands trembled slightly, not from nerves, but from knowing. Everyone around her felt it too. Tonight was the last time. Not the end of the movement, that had already outgrown any one person, but the final page in the story of his return. The close of a circle, the breath before goodbye. They hadn't seen Nathaniel for 9 days. Not since the school announcement. Not since the donation pledges poured in. Not since Madeline's blueprints became promises inked with hope. But there were rumors. A music shopkeeper said a man came in to tune a broken harp and paid in an old gold coin. A janitor in Queens said he found a handwritten sonata tucked into the crevice of a piano lid, signed only with the initials NQ. A hospice nurse described a stranger who sat beside her dying patient one night and played for 2 hours without speaking. When the man left, the patient took his final breath with a smile. Still, no one could prove anything. And most had stopped trying. They understood now. He was never coming to lead them. That had never been his purpose. He was only ever here to ignite the silence and show them they had always carried the spark. But on that 10th evening, when the candles were nearly spent and the air smelled of pine and memory, he came, not through the center, not with attention. He stepped out from behind the chapel wall, just a silhouette at first. Tall, composed, unmistakable. People noticed in waves, heads turned, hands lowered, breaths held, and then the impossible hush. Nathaniel Quinn walked slowly to the yellow piano, no coat, no entourage, just the man and the music he had never stopped carrying. He didn't sit right away. He looked at it first, ran his fingers across its edge, now freshly varnished, touched the leg someone had carved with initials, smiled faintly at the Play Me sign now written in 7 languages across the bench. Then he turned to them, all of them, a sea of eyes and hearts and stories stitched together by sound. He opened his mouth, and for the first time he sang. No one expected it. His voice was low, untrained, fragile in parts, but pure. No microphone carried it. He sang a lullaby, not famous, not rehearsed, a melody his son had once hummed while building Legos in their kitchen, back when the world still made sense. He had never sung it aloud, not even at the funeral, but now it was time. And after one verse, he sat, placed his hands on the keys, and began to play. Not to dazzle, not to teach, but to leave a final note in their bones. It was a medley, bits and echoes of everything they'd heard before. The boy's lullaby, sonata for silence, the girl's hospital melody, fragments of the rain-soaked night when the violin cried beneath the elm. Each piece wove into the next, not with sharp transitions but with memory, fluid, mournful, celebratory. Behind him the sky slowly darkened. The first star blinked through the thinning clouds. Lila felt her throat tighten. Madeline reached for her glasses, wiping mist that wasn't from weather. The little boy, now older in posture, sat still as a monument, his music sheet folded neatly in his pocket. He didn't need to look at it. He remembered every note. As the final melody rose, Nathaniel pressed into the upper keys with deliberate gentleness, as if afraid they might shatter. Then he stopped. His hands didn't fall away. He simply held them there, suspended, waiting. Then, silence. Not because the song was over, but because it had become complete. He stood, and the crowd, as if choreographed by something greater than instinct, rose with him. No clapping, just breath, just reverence. He bowed, not deeply, just enough. And then, before anyone could speak, he stepped down, not away from them, but into them. People parted like water. He walked through them slowly, shaking hands, touching shoulders, nodding, not speaking, just looking, really looking, at each face as if memorizing it. By the time he reached the outer edge, his eyes landed on the boy. He knelt, pulled something from his coat pocket, a single key, from a grand piano, gold-plated, old, worn smooth by decades of touch. He pressed it into the boy's hand. "You start the next one," he whispered, then stood and walked away. No cameras followed, no one called after him. He disappeared into the trees, and the world wept, but not from sorrow, from completion. In the days that followed, the piano was moved into a glass shelter at the center of the park, not roped off, not guarded, still played every day. And above it, carved into wood, "Listen, then play." No signature, no tribute, just an invitation. Because Nathaniel Quinn didn't want to be remembered as a billionaire or a maestro or a founder. He wanted to be remembered as someone who listened and who left behind a song so honest it gave others permission to sing their own. Not for applause, but for healing. Not for perfection, but for connection. And so, the music never ended, because it had finally returned home, to the people, to the silence, to the soul. Sometimes the most beautiful music is played not for crowds, but for healing. Nathaniel Quinn didn't return to the spotlight to reclaim fame. He returned to remind the world of something we've all forgotten, that silence is not empty, and broken things can still sing. In a world addicted to noise and validation, he chose humility. He chose connection. And in doing so, he built a legacy not with money, but with memory. This story is a testament to the truth that no act of sincerity is ever wasted. A child's melody, a second-hand piano, a quiet gathering in the rain. These are not small things. They are the beginning of revolutions. The listening room wasn't born from power. It was born from pain. And it thrived on empathy, on vulnerability, on the courage to play a single note and hope someone listens. So if you're carrying a story, a song, a wound, don't wait for perfection. Share it. Whisper it. Play it. Because somewhere, someone needs to know they're not alone. And sometimes the most powerful change begins with just one key.